If you listen to someone talk that runs some of these organizations, sit in certain political seats, or considered leadership in many facets of life, and you just listen to them talk for 30 to 60 minutes, and you're falling asleep, they're a loser.
That is Anthony Pompliano. You might know him as Pomp. He's an entrepreneur, investor, and Army veteran who's amassed an enormous audience as a prolific content creator driven in large part by his early conviction in Bitcoin. Having been very contrarian and very right, he has a unique insight into the future of media and the last scarce resource that matters: your attention.
Everyone is in a war for attention. You could have unique views or information. You can have authentic views or information, or you can have contrarian views and information. And sometimes those things overlap, sometimes they're very separate.
At the core of his worldview is a measured critique of government spending, the mediocrity of many of our policymakers, and a future where Bitcoin represents a flight to confidence in a climate of increasing chaos, uncertainty, and undisciplined monetary policy.
At the same time that the central bank is saying, whoa, inflation is high, the politicians are like in the next room and they're like, look at these morons just spending like crazy. Bitcoin, when I first came across it, I was very skeptical. Now, fast forward 7-8 years, I don't know if there's another option.
In a world that's become increasingly suffocated by regulation and perverse political incentives driving soaring debt, Pomp argues that rather than trying to change the machine and convince politicians to spend less, we should focus our energy on solving more problems, starting more companies, and growing ourselves out of the situation we're in.
GDP growth used to be like near zero. Now it's like 2-3%. The latest numbers annualized are like 4-5%. Can we get it to 10 or 12%? How fast do we need to grow the economy to grow our way out of the problem?
Day-to-day, Pomp is an investor and entrepreneur, investing out of his family office and owning majority stakes in operating businesses he helps create, but more succinctly describes himself as a problem solver. If there's one thing I've learned from him, it's the power of tenacity and just how far you can go by showing up every single day.
I've published one episode of your podcast every 36 hours for the last 5 years. That's like 1,300 episodes.
But if I built one business from now till the day I die, I wasted my potential.
We spoke about the future of media, growing our way out of debt, talent allocation, Bitcoin, fame, and war.
I've publicly written about one situation in Iraq where an IED went off, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, pitch black outside. There were 2 guys with AK-47s right after a bomb went off. Don't think they were going to get coffee.
This is the Labossiere Podcast. Welcome to the New Narrative.
Okay, I want to start with media generally, right? You recently wrote about Barry Diller. This is the guy, he's the chairman, senior executive IAC, guy who's founded Fox 102, and specifically about how he's become concerned about AI, calling for legislation and regulation. Not to pick on Barry, obviously, but the point here is that incumbents will always seek to suppress competitors. Of course, some level of democratization comes with innovation, but is what we're seeing with AI new? Is it different this time, in your opinion?
No, of course not. I mean, just think about, I have a very simple framework. Compete, don't complain. So many people want to complain, and they'll complain on Twitter or they'll go complain to the government. But you're a loser if you go complain to the government and say we should regulate everyone else, right? Instead, learn to compete. So I'll give you a great example. If you read Bloomberg by Bloomberg, Michael Bloomberg's autobiography, he talks about in the early days of Bloomberg, as they were taking this data, they said, okay, maybe we should also have a media arm. And they would basically pre-write articles, and then they would just insert data into the article. So it would say something like, the S&P today is up, and they would put the data point in. It's up because these 3 stocks, and they put the stocks with it, right? It's not rocket science what they were doing. Is that AI? Right? It was a robot writing an article, but Barry Diller wasn't asking to regulate away Bloomberg. So what ends up happening is that actually they're scared. There's uncertainty. There's fear, which is a natural reaction to some of this stuff, and that's okay. But asking the government to regulate everyone else is insane. And so I think that whenever you feel the incumbents fearing something, you should actually go do a lot of work there because there's probably an opportunity for true disruption because they don't get scared easily. Usually they ignore things. They're not even paying attention. But when they're paying attention and they're fearful, that's where there's usually a lot of opportunity.
On the other side of that, why do you think media stopped championing technology? It feels like we see a lot less positive visions of the future and a lot more doom and gloom in movies or TV shows. And the sentiment's turned into more of a negative one. Do you think this is a more recent disconnect? Like, what are we missing here?
No, they're competing. The media, they say it. They say that we're technology companies. And Facebook says we're a technology company. So what do? You attack your competitors. It's propaganda, 100%. And by the way, the tech companies are doing it with one arm tied behind their back because if you look at the content on those platforms, it's user generated. So it's not like there's some, it's not like Zuck is like publishing articles on Facebook, right? In terms of telling everyone what they should think. And so you see this in a couple of different ways where the mainstream media had hit this kind of fork in the road. And they had to choose, are we going to continue with the journalistic ethics, right? And kind of continue to pursue this, or are we going to do something else? Doing something else isn't necessarily right or wrong, right? I think that people have to always get out of this like good versus evil kind of framework and think of more as just there's trade-offs. And so if you want to be a technology company, yes, you are competing with other people. There's a guy, Rich Greenfield, who's at Lightshed, his big TMT advisor, kind of analyst. And he told me years ago, he said, everyone is in a war for attention. So your podcast is competing with Spotify. Spotify is competing with the New York Times, and the New York Times is competing with Facebook. It's all about attention. You have 24 hours in a day. You're going to sleep some of it. You're going to do other shit, some of it. And some of it you're going to be on your phone. Some people spend an hour on their phone. Some people spend 10 hours on their phone. But what you're doing on your phone is now a competition. And so what occurs is these media companies realize, well, we need technology to be able to compete. We can't, show up to a gunfight with a knife. And so if they aspire to be these technology companies, which many of them actually have amazing technology, right? These technology teams are super legit. Now all of a sudden you have competition. And so the same way that maybe Google will throw a slide out every once in a while at Amazon, or Amazon will do it to Facebook or whatever, now the media companies are doing it. And so if you also view it from the perspective of investors, entrepreneurs, and media analysts, right, or media voices are all doing the same thing. They're all trying to figure out where the future goes. But normally the journalists have a bad business model. They get paid a flat salary from a media company. The entrepreneurs and the investors have unlimited upside. And so now you get in this very weird world where how much of it is financial incentives? Hey, I know that founder who we grew up together professionally, they made a lot of money. I didn't. I'm smarter than them. Naturally, what do? You go attack them. And so it's just a very weird dynamic. Now, the good news is that there are some amazing journalists who actually are very frustrated with what's going on, right? And so those journalists now have the possibility to leave institutions where they feel like it's not going well, and they can go build the things that they think should be happening. And so again, it goes back to technology has reduced the barrier of entry. And so if you have the skill of a journalist, which includes everything from fact-finding, kind of critical thinking, independent thought, I would say even some cynicism is pretty healthy, right? And the ability to write or communicate on video or audio or whatever, you now can go do it and not be beholden to some larger organization that you might not agree with. And so what it does is it increases competition, but competition ends up being good for the end user. And so if you were to go today and say, hey, who are the top journalists in the world, right? I think actually a lot of people would start quoting podcasters or newsletter writers or whoever, not even realizing they're not quote unquote official journalists, right? And so it's like, okay, well, maybe now it's just like, where do you get your news from? Where do you get your information from? And if that playing field gets leveled, sometimes the market participants will have a major advantage. Other times, the market participants are full of shit, and you need the journalist who says, you know what? Actually, you guys are all drunk, right? And you guys all think everything goes up or everything is optimistic. Here's a fraud. Very, very rarely do you see somebody who's able to be hyper optimistic at the right times and also hyper pessimistic at the right times, because it requires such kind of mental dexterity that it's just hard to do.
To your point of, maybe you ask somebody what their most trusted journalist or media outlet of some sort is, and they point to an individual. There's this really interesting kind of recent paradigm shift to your point of, individual people being able to wield an audience like the size of a legacy institution, yourself included, right? As someone who, is a creator and a media business owner yourself, what's your take on the future of content, whether that's from a generative standpoint, whether that's from this standpoint of democratization? Like for you, where do you see this all going?
Yes to it all, but people also forget what is new is really just old. And what I mean by that is like, who is the original podcaster? Charlie Rose. Right? Like Charlie Rose sat at a table and freaking interviewed people. Like we filmed it and he put it on television and everyone was like, oh my God, this is an amazing TV show. Well, now people do the exact same thing. They sit at a table, right? They interview each other and then they put it on YouTube. What's the difference? If you look at it from a kind of a creator standpoint, Warren Buffett is the GOAT financial creator of all time. Like the dude's just an influencer. Right? He used his annual letters. He used the annual conference. He used the media, did all this stuff. And I've jokingly said many times in the past, Warren Buffett would have a podcast, a Substack, and a Twitter account if he was 35 today. And so you start to see this, you're like, again, this stuff is not new. It's not some radically, kind of disruptive idea. The form factors have changed, the platforms have changed, but ultimately what people realized for decades is that holding attention is a really powerful thing. What you use it for can be for a variety of things, but holding attention, which really is what media is all about, is this, advantage in the marketplace that historically the market participants didn't have an ability to do. And now the tools are available. I think the kind of like consensus is there. And so that's why you see so much competition doing it.
To your point, like being able to hold attention isn't intrinsically good, right? So I guess two things seem to be true here. One, like content creation becomes easier and the lines between what's real and what's fake might tend to blur. And two, information travels more quickly and you're able to take action more quickly. Think, meme stocks or bank runs, anything else. So implied volatility goes kind of way up, so to speak. Are you worried about misinformation, fake information in a future like this? I mean, we've seen this with Ukraine. We're seeing it with Israel and Palestine. We're sure as hell going to see it next election cycle. What's your take there?
What is truth? If everyone believes something, is that the truth? Right? So for example, in science or in math, there's real truth. I think Balaji has this great kind of framework of like, is it replicatable? Right? Is it falsifiable? Like, can you actually go and independently verify that this thing is true? Gravity, true. Right? 1 + 1 = 2, true. Who is responsible for X thing? Whether it is something domestically, internationally, economically, geopolitically, all these different things. Truth all of a sudden gets a lot more slippery. It can't be independently kind of replicated, right? And so now what you get is actually what you're trying to establish is what is the consensus. And as we've seen, many times the consensus ends up not being true. And so you get this very weird world where are we actually pursuing consensus or are we pursuing truth? One of the big failures, I think, is if you want to pursue consensus, you have to remember that you're basically trying to get a large population of people to all agree on something, of which, by nature, the average person is probably not nearly as smart as you want to believe that they are, right? When I grew up, my father used to always tell me, think of the average voter and remember about half of the people are dumber than that, right? Now, that's not a knock against any political party or anything. It's just like, averages, right? Yeah. And so like you get into this thing of like, are we pursuing consensus or are we pursuing truth? Now, what I will say is I do think that there are a lot of benefits to the internet and democratization. Community notes is a great example now where all of a sudden anyone in the world can try to go correct it. How do we make sure that those corrections are correct? Like that, there's, kind of this like meta conversation. But then also I think that just the invention of putting a camera in a phone. How many things were we told for decades or centuries that if someone just had a cell phone and recorded it, as they do now almost every single time anything happens, people would have been like, that's not the true story. Like, this is the real thing. I have the source material, right? I have the actual footage itself. Now, that begs the question on all the generative stuff, right? And so I don't know, there's a video that went super viral on Twitter where it was a car that was on fire.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, it looked pretty real, right? Like I would actually venture to say if I didn't know it was fake, I would have thought it was real. And so now you have to start to understand like, okay, how are we going to filter through this? And I don't think society has a very good framework yet on how to do it. And my guess is that people who do things, who are being accused of stuff or whatever, they're going to start immediately, hey, that's AI. That's not really me, right? And so again, society's just going to have to try to like figure this stuff out. But it's a hilarious example, but it's also true. Like we've been trying to find the Loch Ness monster, right? And Bigfoot for a long time. And people have been showing us pictures of these things. And like, again, society over time, I think from a consensus standpoint, it's like, all right, probably not real. But when those photos first started coming out, like they're on the front pages of newspapers and stuff, right? And people are like, is this real? Is this not? So it's an old debate that now just has kind of new nuance to it that we're going to have to figure out. But I don't think I've got the answer better than anyone else.
So there's this big sort of ongoing battle for people's attention on a day-to-day basis. You've been a big winner of this yourself. More practically, how do you cut through the noise in a world where it's becoming so much more common? And do you feel a duty to be pushing a specific idea or vision?
I think there's a couple of ways you can cut through the noise. You can have unique views or information. You can have authentic views or information, or you can have contrarian views and information. And sometimes those things overlap. Sometimes they're very separate. But if you kind of think of it as being unique, authentic, or contrarian, those are the easiest ways to cut through. And so if you look at, take something like Bitcoin being an easy example, right? Everyone believes this is worthless. There's a couple of people who don't. You're loud about it. As the thing starts to work, more and more people say, hey, what is this? How does it work? Oh, this person's been talking about this. Public health. There's some people who very early on during the pandemic were calling out in both directions things that were not what was being shared by the consensus. And so again, some people started to pay attention, more people pay attention over time, they cut through the noise. If you look even, recently in some of the presidential debates, there's ways that from an authentic standpoint, information is presented. So it may not be a unique or a contrarian piece of information, but the way it is presented, you're just like, that person is an amazing orator, right? Or this writing is just so compelling. I haven't heard it described this way. And so I think that when you have that framework of like, is the information unique? Is it authentic or is it contrarian? That will help you cut through the noise. But you also got to be right. And I think one of the key pieces is, it's kind of like, fool me once, type mantra. When I see people just trying to be contrarian on every single thing just to be contrarian, it's like you're going to lose trust over time. It's all about the long game of building trust. And so being authentic is usually the easiest one because you can do that for a really long time, right or wrong. Like people will understand, hey, that's the authentic view this person has. Unique information is really hard to come by. There's billions of people on the internet who now have access to all this information. Like, how are you going to come up with something that no one else has? And so building these skill sets or building the kind of framework to filter through is really hard. But once you start to build that up, it actually then allows you to accelerate the content creation standpoint because now you've got, okay, I know the playbook. I know how to kind of keep going back to the well and get this information on the web.
I want to talk about optimism.
Did you see me almost screw up the George Bush? I was thinking the George Bush.
I was thinking of the same thing. Fool me. Can't fool me again.
Every single time I hear someone say it, I always think of Bush saying it. And I'm like, man, one day I'm going to forget which one's the real one because that's an all-time quote.
Oh my God, man. Flashback. Ridiculous. I want to talk about optimism for a second. We have this... Right. The larger idea here is that, society as a whole is kind of a game of confidence and in instilling that confidence into people. Everybody kind of agreeing on these fictions, these shared narratives that let society stand up in the first place. And it's key to the whole thing working, right? More recently, it feels like we've seen a decline of trust in institutions. I interviewed Bradley Tusk a couple months ago, and he sort of had this point that he thinks this is something that started closer to the Vietnam War, sort of worked its way through up until now. But I'm curious from your perspective more immediately, what's driving this? Like, what do you think we're missing?
We let losers run these institutions, these organizations and the government. Like, it's that simple, right? Think of it, go to the most kind of barbaric example you can. Go to the battlefield in a war, right? You can have a pessimistic loser, and you can have an optimistic winner, right? And at the end of the day, if you're sitting there with a group of guys and you got to go into battle, who are you going to follow? You're going to follow the optimist, right? You're going to follow the person. You're like, that person is a savage and they are not going to stop until they succeed. If you listen to someone talk that runs some of these organizations, sit in certain political seats, or considered leadership in many facets of life, and you just listen to them talk for 30 to 60 minutes, and you're falling asleep, they're a loser, right? Because part of the job of being a leader is to motivate people, to inspire them, to lead to higher degrees of ambition, to lead to results. But if you can't do that, the policies and the different decisions and stuff almost doesn't matter, right? And so you see it, politics is a place where it's like magnified. There are certain people who are incredibly inspiring. People hear them talk and they tend to end up being successful in politics because they're great at doing this. They may have bad policies, but they're great at the inspiring part, right? And so I joke when I say, hey, we've let losers kind of run these organizations, but it's kind of the degradation is compounding as well. It's like, okay, we had an A+ person run the organization, right? They had great ideas, they had great execution, and they were really inspiring, can motivate people and a great leader. Then we let somebody in who's just an A. And then we let someone in who's an A-, and then a B+, and then a B, and then a B-. And then you look up and you're like, dude, who the fuck is running these places, right? And so I think that's like the part of the problem. Now, the solution is we just need people to stand up and say what they believe, right? And what you find is more people than not actually believe the future can be better than the past, right? More people than not actually think the United States is the best place in the world, right? More people than not. And you just go down a list, all these things. And they've somehow become like unpopular. A great proxy is somebody should do a study on Twitter and take all of the Americans that are on Twitter and look, are there more American flags in Twitter bios and in Twitter names or foreign flags, right? And I don't even know exactly what the like repercussions of that are, but my guess is more foreign flags than American flags for Americans. And so you think through that and you're like, okay, it could be people are really proud where they came. They're an immigrant, right? That makes a ton of sense. And actually maybe one of the key ingredients to the success of America is people being proud. Hey, I came from Italy. I came from this. I came from this, whatever. Now I'm here in the United States. And I'm going to take these things from my home country, right? Maybe I'm going to build a restaurant that I'm going to bring my authentic food here. Now that makes it part of America, right? Or I'm going to bring the certain ethics or morals or whatever, like amazing. But then there's a lot of other people who literally will publicly say, I'm ashamed to be an American, and they have a different flag in their bio. And you're like, dude, what the fuck is going on here, right? And so a lot of times I'll share these messages of, people in the United States forget there's a line out the door of folks who want to get into this country, right? Some of them are so frustrated they just come illegally. Some of them wait for months or years for visas and green cards and all this type of stuff, right? And so recently there was a gentleman, I forget his name, unfortunately, but he was recording a video and he was like, I just got my O1 visa. And he was ecstatic, right? And I shared the video and I said, listen, in case any of you who don't want to be here don't realize it, this is the reaction of someone who immediately got the O1 visa, can now come to the United States and work. And this is how they feel. You don't feel that way, but you were born here, or maybe you got here and now you don't feel the same way. And so it leads, all these little pieces are contributing to a degradation of a society that we need the people to be strong. We need good leaders. And then we need folks who are ambitious and energized to go and build a better future. But if you don't have one of those three things, like you can have two of the three and like maybe you'll be okay. But it's not guaranteed. If you have all three, there's almost no country in the world that doesn't have a better future than a past when they have all three of those boxes checked. And I just think that, it's almost become not cool, right? If you walk down the street and you're like, hey, you know what? I actually think we're heading the right direction. How many people will say that? Not that many. Everyone will tell you how the world's ending or, this or that or whatever. And you're like, maybe. But, I think Buffett actually, one of the things he's got right is just like never bet against America.
Do you think there's a balance to be struck here when we're talking about optimism and pessimism? I mean, you can either sit there and think the world's going to be better and work to make that a reality, or you can, sit around complaining. But blind optimism isn't necessarily good for people either, right? Like as an entrepreneur, it might mean realizing that stuff doesn't get built without people actually going out and building it. And maybe as an investor, like I think it's Jeff Lewis who has this good quote about something along the lines of pessimistic investors tending to do better because you should, I think by default, be cynical or whatever. Do you think there's a balance to be struck, or like a specific way that narrative should be pushed?
I think that optimism and pessimism are diabolically opposed to each other, and pessimists are not better investors, nor do they actually end up doing much. What I think ends up happening is you have to be optimistic, but you also have to be honest with yourself about challenges, right? Or risks or various things. That doesn't make you pessimistic about it, right? Like in some weird way, being cynical doesn't necessarily make you a pessimist. Right. And so like there's nuance and we'll very quickly get into a war of words, right? Yeah. And like what word, whatever. I think what Jeff is saying is correct in that like you can't be blindly optimistic, right? And just be like, hey, there's no risk. Like obviously you're going to get, screwed along the way. And so what you can be is you can be like long-term optimistic, but almost like short-term cynical or like very detail oriented and like realistic, if you will. And that then allows you to kill risk and kind of do all this stuff. What you tend to find though is people are intellectually lazy. They either are 100% pessimistic and like the world is ending, or they are 100% optimistic and like there is no negative thing. But nuance is really important. And so we have a oversupply of pessimism and an undersupply of optimism. And actually, I think society would be drastically better if we simply taught classes in high school around how to be optimistic. Right? People would be happier. They would actually get more production done. And my guess is that we would build things, whether they're companies, infrastructure, whatever, that would lead to a better society over the long run by simply just teaching people how to look at the glass half full versus half empty, because the rest of society is barraging them with everything is bad. Now it's even you're bad, right? And you're dumb. You can't accomplish anything. We, the government, will give you permission to do something. And, we kind of get the results that we get from that.
All right. I want to talk about national debt, which is obviously a riveting topic. U.S. government's national debt is over $32 trillion. That's $100,000 per citizen, $260,000 per taxpayer.
It's $33.7 trillion now.
Okay.
Literally, it's gone up.
It's gone up in the last.
It went up last month over $600 billion. On what? I still don't know.
So we are now so much in debt that we're paying as much on the military as we do on interest payments on debt. Let's break this down. So like mandatory spending, discretionary spending, and biggest of all, like why is interest on debt a problem?
So if you did this research a week ago, that's correct. Now we are spending, as of 2 days ago, more than $1 trillion annualized on interest payments for the national debt. So we're paying interest on the debt. And if you annualize out what we're paying right now, it's more than $1 trillion, which makes it the second largest budget item for the US government behind Social Security. We are spending more on interest than we are on defense, education, innovation, anything else. Like this is a fucking joke, right? And there are multiple contributing factors. One of them being we're just spending too much. Like it doesn't take a genius to look. The last time we had a government surplus in the United States was in 2001. It has been fucking 22 years. We just spend more than we make, right? So when you have that as kind of almost a default position now, of course debt goes up. Like how else do you pay for it? Yeah. So that's problem one. Problem two is as we were accelerating this debt, Ken Griffin actually very eloquently stated earlier, we were driving trillions of dollars in debt, but never expected interest rates to go back up to what would be historical normal levels, kind of 4, 5, 6, 7%. So now, not only do we have a lot of debt, we got expensive debt. Problem two. Problem three is we continue to find ourselves in positions where we are stuck between making decisions with our heads or our hearts. And so a great example is these foreign kind of conflicts. We technically are not directly engaged. So we're not saying, hey, the United States is going to war. But we are participating in what is essentially a proxy war. We're saying we will give weapons, money, training, all this different stuff. When you do that, you are, I think in the bullish case, stating we have certain countries that are our allies and we have a commitment to them that we will protect them. And so we are fulfilling our commitment. That is a valiant thing to do, right? The problem is at the same time that the central bank is saying, whoa, inflation is high. We need to increase interest rates. We need to decrease our balance sheet. We need to try to incentivize people to stop spending. The politicians are like in the next room and they're like, look at these morons just spending like crazy. And so you get this weird battle now where it used to be that the government was like kind of one big organization. We now have politicians actually acting in direct opposition to the central bankers. Guess who wins that battle? The politicians, right? Because they got unlimited spending ability, whereas the central bankers, they really only have two tools. And so now what you're getting is if we keep interest rates high, because we're trying to tame inflation and kind of get the economic objectives achieved, we're just going to keep spending more on interest rate payments. And so if you're a country that spends more money on carrying your debt than you actually do on improving your country, you're screwed. And so what it is going to take is basically one of two things to solve this problem. The government runs a surplus and pays down the debt. If I said that to anyone in America today, they will laugh at you. There's not even a path where people could see that happening, right? They're like, you got a better shot of the aliens landing in the middle of Times Square than you do of these people paying down any of this debt. So that's first, but they could do it. The second thing is they can devalue the currency. So if you think of, a mortgage payment, right? The dollar's been devalued over 30 years. You're paying back your mortgage with cheaper dollars in the future, ends up being good for your finances. So they could do that. The problem when they do that is that the bottom 50% or more of Americans hold no investments. So they have all their money in cash. $1 in 2020 today is worth 83 cents. About 2.5 years later. $1, whatever you could buy with that dollar, now it only buys you the equivalent of 83 cents of that same product. And so when you look at that, you say to yourself, wait a second. If I had $1 in the bank, I'm down 17%. According to the official numbers, not even getting into the unofficial numbers. And so you say, okay, well, if half of the country is doing this, what's happening in the economy? And what you find is exactly what you expect. Take housing affordability. It is the worst that it has been this century, right? It's the worst it's been in 40 years. Why is it so bad? Well, home prices went up and people didn't get paid more money. Like, it's not that hard, right? And so if you go and you talk to the Fed, recently this guy, Neil Kashkari, who he said some pretty crazy stuff over the years. He said it's not the Fed's fault that housing affordability is the worst that it's been. It's actually that we've been structurally underbuilding housing in America for years, and that's why it's like this. And so this is a perfect example of there's a sleight of hand playing. Have we been structurally underbuilding? Yes, 100%. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But we've been doing that for decades. Why wasn't housing affordability bad 5 years ago or 7 years ago, right? Or 10 years ago? What changed is the monetary policy, the devaluing of the currency. And so it accelerated what was this like underlying thing. I almost think of it as like, you can put a bunch of newspapers and wood in the fireplace, but there's no fire until you fucking light it, right? Then all of a sudden you got a raging fire. It's not like, oh, you know why we have a fire? Because we put the wood in there. No, it's because you lit it on fire, idiot. And so same thing here is like we lit it on fire and now we got this burning fire and everyone's looking around like, yo, who did it? And no one wants to take responsibility.
To that point, do you think there's any point in trying to fix the root of the spending at an individual policymaker level? Like there's this sort of perverse incentive because you're just passing the debt on to somebody who comes after you. I don't know. It just doesn't feel feasible.
The only way that I could see actually getting spending under control is if you had a president who's willing to go in and literally just set the place on fire. Right. And so like I saw recently, I think it was a politician, I can't remember. Somebody gave an interview and they said, you know how we could cut like majority of the IRS, right? In terms of like staff, they're like, just make it like a flat, 15% tax rate. Like now all of a sudden it's like very simple. Like how much money did you get made? How much income did you have? Did you pay your taxes or not? Now, again, that is like such an overly simplistic view of the world, but like you probably could save some money, right? I don't think you're actually going to get rid of majority of whatever. Then there's certain organizations that you definitely could get rid of. When the Infrastructure Act came out, my brothers and I guess we were just bored, decided to read most of it. The things that were in this bill would blow your mind. There was literally authorization for the government to buy weed to study the impact of driving high. So we joked, we said, look, we know like 1 million people who do it for free. like we don't need the government to go spend money on that. So I saved just the money there, right? Then they were doing things like they're building highways, and they wanted to study the impact on unique species of plants when they build the highways. Like, that's really what we need to be spending money on right now? And then there was things like they were giving tens of hundreds of millions of dollars to like certain organizations or conservations or whatever. And then it comes out like they're being run by like the wife of a politician.
Yeah.
And you're just like, we are being hosed, right? And so if you kind of accelerate this out, and you're like, okay, we have this huge spending problem, all this stuff, right? The spending problem is getting worse. And so if you just look structurally at what's happening, they're going to have to get more tax dollars. And so take New York City as an example. New York City is the first city in America that has a congestion tax, right? A congestion tax, for those that don't know, means that if you drive, I think it's 59th Street. If you drive from above 59th, below 59th, during certain hours of the work week, they charge you, it's like 20 something
like $20, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about that for a second, why are they doing that? They claim it's for this and that and all this, but no, they need the tax revenue, right? And so they're going to start coming up with all kinds of crazy shit that they can tax you for. And again, if you understand the incentives, they have to do it. They have to figure that out. So it's no longer about like wealth, right? It's no longer about, oh, when you sell something, we're going to take some of that money and all these rules that they've previously done. Now they're starting to get into things like, if you just drive across this street, we're taking a tax.
Yeah.
Now, again, there's toll booths. Right? So like, it's not like this is some grand new idea, but what they're doing is they're taking money from you, but they're not actually giving you anything in exchange. Usually with a toll, they're like, hey, we built this brand new highway. It's amazing. Look how awesome. When you ever drive on like a new highway, you're like, yo, where's this fucking balling? Right?
Yeah,
like you're just like smooth, no potholes. Like you're just like, this is cool. Right? But guess what? We need you guys who drive on this to help us pay for it. So we're going to put a toll booth. Again, people don't like to pay tolls, but at least I think there is some like implicit understanding of like, cool, I get this like nice, smooth, cool new highway. I'll pay the $2.50 or whatever. Here, they're just like, you get nothing new, but we take more money. And so that's where I think people start to say, wait a second, this is a little crazy, right? There are multiple places in the United States as well where now you don't start working for yourself until July. Because over 50% of your income goes to taxes. And so you start to kind of enter this thing and you're just like, all right, again, you can sit and complain all day long. But instead of complaining, to your point, I don't know if you're going to change it. I think it's going to be much easier for most people to say, okay, here's the set of rules that I've been given. They're probably going to get more onerous over time. I can't control that. You know what I can control? I can control my income, my investments, all these other things. And so let me go compete in the market rather than sit around and complain about this other stuff, because complaining is a waste of time, but competing actually could be a productive use of your time.
So there's basically two options here, right? You can try and convince politicians to stop running a deficit, or you can encourage the private sector to do something. And I think you kind of argue for the latter here. You sort of stop making the problem worse or grow your way out. Walk us through this thesis of, I don't know, people are calling it like accelerationism, whatever you want to call it these days, to sort of get ourselves out of this hole.
I mean, forget even like the EAC stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's just GDP growth used to be like near zero. Now it's like 2-3%, right? The latest numbers annualized are like 4 or 5%. Can we get it to 10 or 12%? Like just start doing math, right? How fast do we need to grow the economy and grow GDP to grow our way out of the problem? If you walk down the street or tweet it, like I tweet all the time, right? People will literally send me DMs like, you are a fucking idiot. Right? And I'm like, yo, big dog, check it out. We just took GDP from 2 to 5%, right? Now, again, some of that is inflationary pressures. Like there's a whole bunch of reasons why, right? But if we could grow at 10 to 12%, now all of a sudden, we actually could make a dent in the problem. Because the problem really is debt to GDP. You can have all the debt in the world if you're just flush with cash, right? Think of it as if I say, hey, this person's got $1 million of debt, most people are like, oh, that sounds like a lot. But I'd say, but they make $100 million a year. That sounds like nothing. If I'd say they make 50 grand a year, you're like, that person's screwed, right? So it's all about both income and debt levels. And so if we can increase GDP, we could actually get out of the problem or get ourselves in a better situation. Nobody ever talks about that. they all rail against debt to GDP, the debt levels, the national debt, whatever. It's easy. It's a big friggin' number. It's like a big marketing campaign, right? $33.7 trillion. Everyone's like, that's a big number. Okay. But imagine if the United States of America got together and we had a president or politicians or whoever, right? Whoever was the person who kind of called the meeting and said, guys, we are in a dire financial position. I'll go as far as to say we are in an economic war with ourselves. We have one option. See all these other people in suits and ties that have these political positions? They are going to spend as much as they possibly can. And you guys are going to make as much as you can in terms of production. There's a competition. We have 10 years, see who wins. And we could rally the American people to try to go actually produce more. And we tried to crank on that GDP number. The things you measure will move. And my guess is that we actually could get over 10% GDP growth, but it would require sacrifice from people who live in the United States to focus on it. Why do they not do that? Super unpopular. You ask people to sacrifice. Why the fuck would I sacrifice anything? My life's chill. The government was just sending me checks, like whatever, right? But again, it goes back to if you have losers running organizations, they can't actually rally the troops. They can't get people to be motivated. If you have winners, people who could stand up and say, this is a problem. It's going to be hard. It's actually maybe the hardest thing that you're ever going to do. But if we all come together and we do this and we sacrifice and we create all this extra effort, we can actually put ourselves in a better position, do it for your children. I bet you some people would do it, right? And so it just goes back to this idea of like understanding the problem, figuring out a simple solution, and then being able to actually motivate people to go after it. Instead, what we get is the exact opposite, which is like, don't worry, we'll save you. We're the government. We're going to spend a bunch. Like you're good. And almost like a disincentivizing, right? How many politicians have we seen go after people who are creating GDP growth and be like, you're evil? And so you start getting into some weird situations where you're like, is it that they don't understand the problem and that's why they're vilifying the people who are actually contributing solutions? Or do they actually understand the problem and they're okay with it? I can't speak for them. I don't know, right? But there's a lot of questions there.
To get into, I guess, more of the details of like how this structurally happens in the first place. You talk a lot about technology innovation, obviously being net positive, but also creating new problems that can kind of propagate like, okay, we need more innovation, more growth. And the way that this continues itself. One that you mentioned is autonomous cars. I think this is so interesting. Autonomous cars are coming.
Canceled in the medical community.
There's going to be less road deaths, obviously, as a result of autonomous cars.
We're going to get to zero.
We're going to get to zero.
America. We're going to get to zero car deaths.
As a result, you get
don't tell all the critics. The critics still think that we should ban self-driving cars. Human drivers are 4 times worse drivers than autonomous vehicles, as reported.
Is it 4x?
By the insurance companies. So guess who actually we should be listening to? The fucking insurance companies. Why? Because they got skin in the game. They're actually making financial bets on this, right? It is their job to know who is a good driver, who is a bad driver. If they're bad at evaluating that, they lose money.
Yeah.
They recently came out and they said that human drivers are 4 times more likely to get into an accident than a self-driving car. And at almost to the day, they banned some self-driving cars in San Francisco.
Wow.
Right? It is a classic example of there's hard data versus hard feelings. And when you trust hard data, you get good decisions. When you trust hard feelings, you almost always get bad decisions. And so to your point, if we get to 0 car deaths in America, that sounds amazing. It will save a lot of lives. But there's second and third order effects of this, right? This is mind blowing to me. Okay. So when we get to 0, right? You have a lot less road deaths. And as a result of that, you have a lot less organ donors, right? So you have a totally different problem in a totally different field. I think you've written about this. There's a shortage of organ transplants available.
So they're starting to transplant genetically modified pigs' hearts, I believe, into humans.
So let me back up for a second.
Yeah.
One of the biggest areas of organs that are available for donation and transplants is car accidents. Car quick death. It's on your license. You've either elected to be an organ donor or not. And there's an entire economy basically set up where they will fly in, they'll get whatever the organ is, they fly it out, they're freezing it, doing all these things to preserve it and get the transplant done, whatever. If you ever heard someone say, I'm waiting on the transplant list, many times what that means is somebody is going to have to get in a car accident and die in order for the organ to be available, right? So yes, there's a huge focus on we're going to get to zero car deaths, and self-driving cars will be here. Most likely at some point in the future, it will actually be banned for humans to drive, right? One of the side effects is that will then lead to a shortage of organ transplants because if no one's dying in the car accidents, we don't have the organs to transplant. So what do we do? Now, completely distinct, separate innovation is occurring with these pig hearts. And so I believe it's the second one successfully in America. They were able to transplant a pig's heart into a human body. When you look at this holistically, you say, okay, one technology is going to solve a massive problem of car deaths. It is going to then create a second problem, which is the organ transplant problem. And so we're going to need a third kind of focus, which is now we're going to have this new innovation around transplants of pig hearts to be able to solve that problem. And so what it does is it's like whack-a-mole. When you use innovation to solve one problem, almost always another problem pops up. And so you have to constantly be long-term innovative and looking for these problems and trying to solve them, because there will never be a shortage of problems to solve. And so when you see that issue, somebody is going to come out. I haven't seen it yet, but somebody will say it. We should ban self-driving cars because there will be a shortage of organs. Which is the equivalent. Like the translation of that is like, we need people to die in car accidents. Right? But that is the pessimistic view of we are too dumb to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so instead, an optimist will look at it and say, hey, we should get to zero car deaths immediately. And by the way, as we're moving towards that, we need another team working to be able to solve the organ transplant problem. But that's not how society works. So first of all, it's like, yeah, there's a great example of solve one problem, another problem pops up. I think it's kind of unique because, again, it goes back to like, why is this the one that cuts through? Right? I've used this example many times in conversation. I'll have people come back to me weeks later. I'm like, I've told 20 people that thing, right? And it's because it's unique. They haven't heard it before. And it actually has this element of contrarianism to it, which is like, are self-driving cars good? Most people would say yes. And then you're like, but, and it makes them question. And so when you look at a problem, we can either regulate it and be onerous and like slow and do all the stuff, which is what we're doing. Or if we had great leadership, they would stand up and they would simply say one thing: zero car deaths by X date. And then we're going to solve the organ problem. But I don't think that any American leader has yet come out and said zero car deaths by X date. If you don't have the goal, how are you ever going to achieve it? Instead, we're literally debating whether the president is going to utter the words of the most successful electric vehicle, autonomous vehicle car company in America. I don't know if he forgets it or if he like legitimately is not interested in promoting them.
Yeah.
But either way, it's bad, right? And so it's like, I was in a Tesla recently, and self-driving was always like, it's kind of like a highway, you turn on the highway and it like kind of, sort of, stayed in the lane. Yeah. Like it was pretty good, right? But you were still like, okay, you're just like following the road, right? Now it is fantastic.
Really?
Oh, I mean, you turn it on, it's changing lanes. It is, making turns. I mean, like it's like actually what self-driving, you would think of self-driving being. And so then I always ask myself, like, have the politicians ever rode in the car? Right? And so it always goes back, like there's two rules that I've always thought would be interesting to implement on the politicians, who like, I know I rail against them a lot, and because it's easy, they're like almost like verbal punching bags, right? Of just like the politicians.
Would you ever run for office?
No, hell no. Because I actually don't think that they are the group that gets the most stuff done, right? Like a good example is they're still trying to get the national minimum wage off $7.25. Like the market's already at $15, right? The politicians are still debating. Like it's just, it's like academic versus like, kind of real world application. When you look at the self-driving stuff, one, if you get put into office by a certain industry, you should have to abstain from then regulating or legislating that industry.
Ooh.
So if a bunch of biotech companies gave you money and got you into office, you now can't create rules in the biotech industry. So immediately what it does is like, hey, they may just like you as a decision maker. They still may give you money, but now you're taking away the pay to play.
Right.
You're taking away the like, hey, we put you there, you give us good
favors,
rules, right? Yeah. So that's kind of one interesting one. There's a bunch of nuance. You have to figure out how to kind of do it. You wouldn't want to disincentivize people who maybe like, if you came from the biotech industry and you're really smart on biotech and your friends just happen to be in the biotech industry, right? Like we don't want that smart person on a topic to not be able to do it. So you got to work through all the details. The second one is you should not be able to legislate or regulate a technology unless you've used it. Right? So think about this for a second. How do you create self-driving car rules if you've never been in a self-driving car? You don't even know how it works.
Well, there's a slope there, right? Do you need to get a pig heart transplant in order to be able to regulate pig heart transplants? Like,
no, but they're not going to regulate pig heart transplants, right? Because if you think about it from this perspective, is the people who end up having the best ideas around the regulation of heart transplants are people who give heart transplants or receive them. But what ends up happening is you don't have to receive the heart transplant, but do you think that maybe we should have a heart transplant surgeon in the room to help regulate heart transplants?
Right.
Probably. Right? But like that's a perfect example. Like we have a bunch of people who have zero clue about heart transplants being like, well, I don't think that we should, okay. So another one is there's a great one. I've said this before, and Matt Levine at Bloomberg wrote a piece, and he was like, "This is stupid. Like, does the FDA guy have to take cocaine to be able to say cocaine is not legit?" It's like, well, hold on a second here. The FDA chief 100% takes drugs. Might not be cocaine, but definitely takes drugs, right? Could be aspirin, could be anything, but like they're a user of drugs, and so that is why they are positioned to be able to do it. We're not talking about people who are like, hey, crypto's a good example. Hey, I use money.
Yeah.
Right. No. We're talking about people who literally have never touched the technology and they have no understanding, no anything. And so it gets in this very weird thing where, I think to Matt's point, there is details and nuance, right? And what it's not saying is that you got to use cocaine to be able to regulate cocaine. But what it does say is you have to be familiar with the technologies. And my guess is there's probably people at the FDA who used cocaine before. Right? Like they may not say it, they may not admit to it, they may not disclose it, but like, and so when you kind of go through these steps, you start to say to yourself like, all right, how do we create structures that allow for informed people to make the best decision available at the time? And we can use crazy language and kind of extremist examples to then reinforce the idea, or we can just simply say to ourselves, if we actually want to all work towards a better future, let's just get people who are informed to do it. Another one is when they do the hearings. You ever seen like they'll call someone in for a hearing and then you listen to the questions and you're like, this person literally doesn't even know what to talk about.
Oh my God, yeah. With any tech CEO on the Hill, it's just terrible.
So another one is they should have to take a 10-question test beforehand. No staffers, no anything. If you don't pass the test, you can't ask questions. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to spend 20 minutes beforehand and they're going to get educated to pass the test.
Yeah.
And so it's like simple things where we wouldn't allow for students to like just keep participating without proving, some degree of knowledge. But we allow people who run the country to do that.
Yeah.
And so I do think that young people specifically understand this. And when you look at the political ranks, there's a lot of young people, even if you don't agree with their political views, they seem to be very intelligent, very diligent, very hardworking. They use a lot of the technology tools, Twitter, email, et cetera, to try to talk to a lot of folks, right? Gather information. They're usually, from what I've seen in these politicians, they'll listen to podcasts, they're watching YouTube, like they're getting information. And so when you talk to them, they seem to be much more up the curve. What technology, obviously, I think people would assume, but also on other policy issues. And so I don't think it's just an age thing, but I do think that there is somewhere in the past, there's this line of like, information is abundant, information is not abundant. And if you grew up in a world where information was abundant, you're used to going and finding the information and being informed and like doing all this stuff. If you grew up in a world where information was not abundant, I actually think you're just used to like winging it.
Yeah.
And so like, okay, let's get more people who grew up in the information abundant world in there, and hopefully we'll get better decisions.
Yeah. Okay. So to the earlier point, to bring it back, right? Like for, innovation to happen, people need to innovate. For problems to be solved, there need to be people solving problems. Need to be people solving the self-driving issue, the pig heart transplant issue, and any, like pork shortage or whatever that comes after it. Really fundamentally here, how do you increase the number of entrepreneurs, and why are they so important?
I think that there's a couple of different aspects to it. So first is you have to explain to people that entrepreneurs provided them the life they have. So it's like the most fundamental, kind of a societal positioning. I gave this speech at a conference that we had, and I said, founders are the most important people in the world. And, I got some messages and people are like, you're an idiot. Okay. My point though was every single thing around you, an entrepreneur made. This table, an entrepreneur made. The cameras, entrepreneur made. Microphone, right? The clothes, the food we eat, like all this stuff, entrepreneurs are responsible for. And people will be like, oh, well, what about the street, idiot? Like I think Barack Obama had a thing. He was like, you didn't do it yourself. Like we provided the road, right? It's like, well, actually the government provided the funding, who then hired an entrepreneur to go lay the road, right? And so when you kind of look through this, you're like, okay, if we can agree that entrepreneurs are really just problem solvers, right? To stay in business, you got to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. And so let's switch out the word entrepreneur for problem solver. Problem solving should be seen as good. If it's not, we're screwed, right? Okay. But let's just say that, okay, we're gonna all agree that problem solving is good. Then what we should do is first celebrate those people. You solved a problem, good job. Mm-hmm. When you're a kid, if you solve a problem, it's like it's your birthday. Everyone's excited, right? Especially like a young kid. Like if you're like a 4-year-old and you do something to solve a problem, literally, your parents tell everyone they see for the next 2 weeks that you solved this problem, right? And everyone like looks at you, oh, great job, right? Whatever. Like, why did that die? Right? If you're 45, right, and you solve a problem, they should line the freaking streets and everyone should clap for you, right? Guess what? We'll solve more problems. So I think that's like just from like a pure like mechanism standpoint is we should celebrate the people who are solving problems. Yeah. The second thing is we have to teach people that it's possible. And so one of the big issues is we spend from K through 12 indoctrinating people into a life where you're going to basically go work in a factory. That factory can be an information factory or it can be a kind of a blue collar type factory. But it's all about being an employee. I actually believe there's a lot of people who don't want to be an entrepreneur. They don't want the stress. They don't want, all this stuff. It's kind of nice for a lot of people to show up at 9 o'clock, do what you're told, go home at 5 o'clock, not think about work again until you walk in at 9 o'clock, right? In the tech world or in kind of the business world, you're like executives and people who like they go home at not 5 o'clock and then they're thinking about it all day and all this stuff, right? That's somewhat foreign to them. But there's a lot of people who like that is actually a really nice life. But can we actually get them to think of themselves as a problem solver, even inside the company? So it's less about like, do you own your own business or do you not? And it's more about, are you solving problems? And so if we can teach people that, some of them will say, hey, I can solve this problem by myself. Other people will say, me and my team at this company I work at, we can solve a problem as well. And so it's really a resurgence of like problem solving more so than it is like you have to be a founder. And then the other thing is explaining to people how to connect you solving this problem and how it improves the lives of your children. And I think one of the things that somewhere along the way in society seems to have kind of fallen off is this idea that it's not all about just the greater good, like some like kind of fluffy society thing. It's like, no, if there is a hole in the sidewalk outside and you go outside and you fill it, your kid can now run up and down the sidewalk and won't fall in the hole. I think people understand that. What about in your local community? if you're able to figure out a way to solve some problem that then your kid grows up in that community, they have a better life. And so when you tie it to their personal, like your kid is going to have a better situation, I think it motivates a lot of parents, right? And so instead of trying to tie everything to the national conversation, I actually think there could be a huge benefit from trying to tie things to the local conversation as well, maybe even just to the family conversation. And so if you can celebrate the problem solvers, if you can teach people how to solve problems, and then you can tie it to what that actual impact is, I think you now have somewhat of a framework to go and try to do it. Now, the other thing you got to do is you have to disincentivize people from having low ambition, right? And so why do a lot of companies not work? Well, it's because they're just doing the same thing everyone else is doing. It's kind of like the information, right? It's not unique, it's not authentic, and it's not contrarian. Well, if you're building a company and like you have, I don't know, you're making pizza on the street corner and you're really good at doing it. And I'm like, well, that guy's making a lot of money. I'm just gonna go make pizza, right? Sure, there's a lot of pizza parlors, across America, but what if we take that same person who's got the entrepreneurial kind of interest and we say, hey, you know what else could be really valuable? And go and do it. And so like one of the things that I've always been stunned, if I was the mayor of a small town, where's your list? Have a fucking list of all the problems and just have a meeting every week and say, yo, who's working on number 3? Right? We need someone to solve number 3. Is there anyone who lives in this community who can help us solve number 3? I bet you that people would be jumping over each other to solve number 3. Right? And then guess what? Anyone who solves number 3, instead of us spending $1 gazillion to pay McKinsey to come in and give us some bullshit, report, I'll just give you a third of the money. How many people would be solving problems in small town America if the mayor just had a list, called for people to say, if you solve number 3, you get 10 grand? These problems be solved, every day.
Yeah.
And so it again comes back to this idea of like, that politician would have to be entrepreneurial. They would have to be thinking of it from a problem solver mentality, even though they're in what many people would consider like a bureaucratic seat. And so it's hard. And I don't think that I've got some grand idea that anyone else doesn't have. Mm-hmm. I think it's more of just as a society, we need to give the green light to people to go do this stuff. Because when you talk to a lot of people inside of government, not politicians, but like inside of these government organizations, they're frustrated, right? I always joke like, do you think teachers go to school and like, I'm gonna be a bad teacher today? No. They're like, I've been doing this for 15 years, been beaten down by the system every single day. Every time a kid's acting like an idiot in my class and I go to the principal tells me the kid's right. Eventually I stop going to the principal. And then I got mayhem. Kids are running around throwing basketballs off the wall and stuff, right? Like, instead, if we empower these people and we say, you know what do you think is the best way for you to teach these kids? Now, there's some idiot teachers, right, who would go do crazy shit. We'd be like, hey, no. But actually, I think that there's a lot of teachers who, if we just said, hey, how do you think is the best way to do this? And we gave them the kind of green light to solve the problem, the outcomes would be better. It's just hard to do that at scale when it's a top-down planning process.
What about when the outcomes aren't as straightforward or the problems aren't as straightforward, right? There's this idea, I think, in context here that the Douyin, the TikTok equivalent in China, showing a lot more educational, sort of patriotic content than we necessarily get over here, which is especially important for young people. I think, to me, this is kind of at odds with like the simple truth that TikTok won in the free market, right? Like they just did it better than we were able to. But building something better is kind of tough, right? Like anyone is sort of naturally going to prefer the wire-heading pleasure machine with like a super aligned algorithm over something that only shows you like fun science experiments for 40 minutes a day. How do you reconcile this, right? In like a free market context, when building something like quote unquote better doesn't necessarily mean building something better for you. This probably applies to pretty much anything in like the vices category.
I think when it comes to TikTok, it's very obvious that the quality of the content, the programming of the content, and frankly, the degradation of the mental situation of these young people is a net negative when it comes to kind of teenagers, right? But the same politicians who are railing against it got their own kids on it, right? And so like, how do you separate out the talking points from like who actually believes it's a problem? Hard. On top of that, what do? Do you just ban it and then you're going to like somehow monitor every single ISP or every phone, or, you know, what are you going to do? You take out the app store? Like what do you do? And so the best solution would be someone in America builds a better one. It is very hard to see that happening right now. And so politicians are going to have to make a choice. If you let it run wild, you got to live with the consequences. If you ban it, you're essentially stepping into the free market, right? And you are 100% now becoming judge, jury, executioner. I don't know. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision, but I can tell you that it seems pretty obvious. It ain't net positive.
Yeah.
And so, you know, how do you solve it?
You've recently had this like, I think kind of foray into talent allocation, which I thought has been pretty interesting. I'm not sure what the latest iteration of this is, but you've been working in employment and training and more broadly, like getting people employed at great startups or, you know, companies solving great problems. How did this start? How's it work? Why is it important? Walk us through it.
If you want to build innovative companies, you need people who can build those products, right? Or those services, who can run those companies. One of the things that you realize as you build a big audience online is it's made up of people. And it all started because I would have executives, founders come on the podcast, and they would say to me, I would ask at the end of the podcast, what do you need help with? And they would all say the same thing to me. I need to find more talent. That's interesting. I got people in my DMs every day asking me like, hey, I need a job. I did this. Like pretty impressive person. What if we just help connect them? Was the original idea. And so we literally used off-the-shelf software and set up in a single day a job board. And we just said to a couple companies, hey, put your jobs up here. I'm going to tweet about it and let's see if people come in and apply for the jobs. Fast forward 2.5 years, 3,000 people, more than 3,000 people have now gotten a job. So you look at it and you're like, okay, like that works, right? Like if I can do this is like part of my frustration. If I can figure that out, there are people 1,000 times smarter than me. Like I literally am an idiot when it comes to this stuff, right? But it's like I use off-the-shelf software. I put a little logo that we literally, I think, made in the equivalent of like Microsoft Paint, right? Like it's not a huge thing. We set it up and I tweeted. Now, sure, I have an advantage because I have a big audience, but like that's not rocket science. And so I always try to remind myself, imagine being one of those 3,000 people. You get paid more money. You got a better job. You enjoy your it really has an impact. And so then we started to realize, oh, people are showing up to the job interviews and they don't know things. What if we just talk to them before they go to the job interview and tell them the things that they should know? Okay, how do we do that? I don't know. Let's start. I think the first one had like 10 people or 15 people, something like that. All right. And it was like a slide deck. You should know this. You should know this. You should know this. You should know this. Okay, that seemed to work. Hey, maybe we should take this more seriously and like put better slides together. How would we actually get the people who need to do this? Hey, would these companies hire them if they knew they went through the training, like a higher percentage? And you start to like figure it out. And then you're like, okay, again, I'm an idiot. If I can figure this out, like what the fuck? Yeah. And so you just start walking through this. And on the employment side, it's just like, there's a lot of smart people who are underemployed, right? Like I meet people all the time. And I love like talking to people when I'm like going around New York City. Meet somebody and I'm like, you moved here from another country. You have like an electrical engineering degree and you're working at a job that doesn't even require a college degree in America. Why? And it's always, I don't know where to go. I don't know what's possible. Sometimes there's like visa issues. Like there's the things that are either if you're exposed to the information, then you can change, or there are things that can be solved if you know where to go and
Sure.
Get the solution. And so, again, imagine if we could unlock people who are underemployed to then go be productive. Well, nobody's thinking or talking about that stuff because nobody is saying we need to increase GDP growth. And so as you start to kind of understand some of these problems, you're like, getting people, if you're building a team, right? Just think of America as a team. Getting people in the right seats is probably pretty important, right? You don't want your point guard playing center. Okay. Well, like how do we at scale figure out who should be doing what jobs? If we could do that, we'd probably be more productive. And so I think that was really kind of like the thought process. And as we've kind of gone down there, we started out really small. Started out with just jobs for crypto. And then we kind of went out and we're like, okay, well, like crypto plus. Now we've said, okay, what about just startups? So dreamstartupjob.com. If you want to work at an innovative company, you go there and you apply. It's completely free. You can apply to as many companies as you want, blah, 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 whatever. Guess what? Thousands of people go every single week and apply to these different companies, and some of them get hired. And so it's like, all right, well, I'm like one person. Why can't we do this with 100,000, 1 million people, right? How is it that somebody goes to a university in the United States of America and leaves and doesn't have a job? How the fuck does that happen? There's 10 million open jobs in America. Is that a matching issue? Is that these are jobs that the college educated person doesn't want? Like, let's go figure it out.
Yeah.
Where are the problem solvers, right? And so that's the like kind of iterations of these things is you want to get deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of just like get people in the right seats. It probably unlocks a lot of productivity.
I want to talk about you for a second. You have this like very obviously forward-facing sort of media business across the podcast, the newsletter, the YouTube channel, and then some other stuff that like I guess maybe you're generally quieter about. You've got media businesses like Resi Club and the Bay Area Times and Reflexivity Research and probably a ton of stuff I don't even know about. Family office, recruiting business. How do you describe what you do?
Solve problems, right? Like, yeah. I mean, it is. I have a theory in life, and it's kind of why I go back to like losers are running the institutions and like we need winners, is people really, like it's that clear. You just fall in one of two categories. You're currently on the losing path or you're currently on a winning path. Sometimes you cross over back and forth, right? You can be a winner, become, oh shit, I'm on a losing streak, go back to being a winner, right? But when you are on the winning path, you tend to get results. Really, that's what it is. If you're playing a game, you win the game. If you're trying to solve a problem, you solve a problem, right? And when I look at what we do on a day-to-day basis, it's pretty much it. Like, I don't even be doing this shit, right? But like, when I see a problem, I can't help myself. It's like, hey, somebody should solve that problem. Yeah. And so it used to be, I would go do it myself. I don't have enough bandwidth to do that anymore. I don't have enough, mental energy to focus on all these different things and stuff. So then I said, okay, we have to expand what the model looks like. So I can't just go solve these problems anymore by myself. So now what I need to be able to do is I need to find one other person, and I partner with people. And I say, you can help me solve this problem. I have a bunch of things, capital distribution, operations, operating playbooks, all these things that can really help do it. I almost think of it like a business in a box, right? If you can do your thing, the thing you're an expert at, and we wrap this around you, this is going to work. And so now all of a sudden, what am I doing? I'm delegating the thing to the person, and we are bringing everything else around them, and they're delegating that to us. And now you've got 1 + 1 = 4 or 5.
Right.
So you go from just me to now me plus one person. And in each one of those businesses, there's one other person that we've partnered with. And then the goal is go build a whole company underneath them, et cetera. Eventually, we're going to have to expand it even more. And it may become more frequent. It may be more ambitious. Like there's all these changes that can happen. But you got to kind of walk. Now we're like crawl. We're like jogging right now. Yeah, we were walking, now we're jogging. Eventually we want to run, right? But yeah, we've started a lot of businesses, and those businesses continue to do well because we're also not trying to start businesses that have tons of technical risk or things with a lot of uncertainty to them. It's very clear. Here's the problem. This person has the skills and expertise to solve that problem. They probably aren't going to go do it by themselves. How do we help give them the push to jump, provide a safety net, get them going? And then you realize you're like, oh, this is a repeatable process. And so, Parker Conrad, he had this interview, I think it was with Patrick O'Shaughnessy. And Patrick was talking to him and he's like, hey man, one of like the core tenets of entrepreneurship, like everyone will tell you is like focus. Yeah. Like just build one product. You're building like 15 of them. And he's like, yeah, why is that a core tenet? Like, what if everyone else is wrong? What if actually the right solution for the market is to build it all together instead of just build one piece of the stack? And you're like, well, actually, no, like, what do you know? And then he's like, well, this is my second multi-billion-dollar company. Like, I'm pretty sure the guy knows what he's doing, right? And so it goes back to this idea of like, most people will tell you how hard business is. Maybe. Some businesses are really hard. But if you have the right system, right, go through all of the businesses. What do Richard Branson, Charles Koch, and Warren Buffett all have in common? They run the same business. They are in the business of owning, because they either started or bought tons of other businesses. Why are those three guys so smart that no one else can do it? Well, do they also have a similarity with Elon Musk? He seems to have done the same thing. So now you're telling me there's 4 people. Well, what about Jeff Bezos? Now we're at 5, right? And we just go down the list. You actually find out there's hundreds, if not thousands of people who have done this. And so this core tenet that we keep stuffing down people's throats of you can only do this one thing is actually not true. And so when I look at it, I say, okay, you have to have playbook, system, operations, all this stuff, which some of those companies I mentioned have. But if I built one business from now to the day I die, I wasted my potential, right? And so it goes to, okay, how do you go solve these problems and figure out the systems to do it? And so who knows? In a couple of years, we may talk and be like, dude, that was stupid what I said on that podcast. Like, it didn't work. So far, it's working. And so if you can do this for a really, really long time, what you're essentially doing is you're just letting compounding work, right? And for someone who Bitcoin's best performing asset in the last 15 years, right? I was fortunate enough to invest in the single best venture capital fund in history. I've seen a lot of the asymmetry that's available in doing this stuff. There is no better return than being able to create a business that works.
I've heard you emphasize kind of like a lack of a plan with all of this, which I guess to some degree is true, but I've got to ask, like, we're 10 years out. What are you doing?
The same thing. Finding problems and solving them. Right? Because it is, you can't help yourself. Well, I don't know. Maybe other people can help themselves. I can't help myself. Like this morning at 7:15 in the morning, I was on a sales call. And now it's at the point where like, I'll get on the sales calls and people are like, why are you on the call? Right? I'm like, this is the most important thing I'm doing right now at 7:15. 7:30, I got to do something else, right? But like, yeah, when you're starting out, it's fun. Like that is the part that is to me the most fun. And so I just think that if it's the type of person that you are, when you see a problem, you get frustrated. You're like, why has no one solved this yet? And if you go back and you look at what I consider, many of the best entrepreneurs in history, they realized that they knew some way to do this, and then it's just repeated over and over again. And so another way to look at it is, if you want to fit it within the core tenets of what people are told, I do one thing. I find problems and I solve them. Right? So it's all like bullshit manipulation of words and phrases and all this stuff of how you want to describe things. But ultimately, like, that is what the world of business is. And so we've made it really complex, but if you just boil it down to the simplest things, find a problem, solve it. Go find another problem, solve it. And if you do that over and over and over and over again, all the financials and the returns, all that stuff will take care of itself. But to me, the more important part is, in the employment business, more than 3,000 people got a new job, right? And so like, I got some friends who are idiots and they'll like flex their new car or their bank account or whatever. My favorite thing is to be, hey, we've helped 3,000 people get a new job. I have a couple of friends who have companies that have more than 3,000 employees, and like, so did I. And I'm like, damn, I got more work to do, right? But like, that's the stuff to me that's more fun, is the impact side of it, because I was fortunate enough when I was young to be dumb enough to just try to do things to make money. And what you began to realize is like, cool, when you have no money and then you have some money, you're like, all right, like I solved some of the money problems, but like all the same other issues still. And you just kind of keep working your way up and you're like, all right, what is the thing that actually gives this enjoyment to me or meaning or whatever? And to me, it's more of the impact stuff.
Another insane stat on the topic of, I guess, just the general tenacity with everything that you do, number of things that you do. You've published one episode of your podcast every 36 hours for the last 5 years. That's like 1,300 episodes. You have a really interesting perspective because you're interviewing generally really successful, thoughtful, smart people every 36 hours for 5 years. What's the most surprising thing that you found is true across most of those people?
Oh, there's not one thing. None of them have it figured out. All of them are insecure. Most people actually just want to have a better life for their family. And they're not like, I want to, own the world. They all have the same problems. So as they get success, things like they all have the same questions about how do I handle family when they come ask me for money? How do I make sure my kids aren't spoiled? How do I deal with certain situations at work, things like that. So it's like, although it's different experiences, it's all common problems. I think another one is how quickly they see what I'm doing in terms of content and audience. And then within weeks, they got a podcast. They got like it's almost like you only need to expose them to an idea for a very short period of time. They may ask one or two kind of clarifying questions and then they go and they act. So that's been cool. And then another one is they come from all walks of life. And, I think that there is a narrative specifically in the United States that most successful founders have a stereotype. But when you look, I think it's like 50% of unicorn founders are immigrants. Right? Or some stat like that. And so you kind of like look through this and you're like, yeah, the data tells a very different story than like, kind of the consensus. But the life experiences are pretty crazy.
Okay. Shifting gears again. I'm actually excited for this one. Tim Ferriss has a great post called 11 Reasons Not to Become Famous. I have a friend named Jake. He's big on like pseudonymity and puts this like parasocial problem in the context of, me being a regular person. How many people do I know that I'm going to run into on the street on a day-to-day basis? Now take that number and multiply it by hundreds or thousands. I literally stopped you in the street 2 weeks ago to come on this podcast. And now we're doing this. So what in your experience has
literally
been,
you did do that.
Literally I did do that. In your experience, what have been like some of the most positive and most negative aspects of being, I guess, a more recognizable figure?
The negatives definitely stand out way more than the positives. The positives, it's like stupid stuff, right? Like it has become easier to do certain things in the business world the more that people knew who I was, right? So like you imagine if you're like buying software and Elon Musk had a software company and he got on the sales call, you probably are like
going to buy the software.
Yeah, maybe you don't even buy it, but like you're definitely going to listen, right? So like again, that's the extreme, right? We're talking about like such a watered down version of that, but like there's things like that are definitely positives. The second thing is I've been able to stay in touch with certain people from like earlier in my life because it's almost like they're reminded of me because they're seeing content on social media or whatever. And then like they'll reach out and I didn't even know they were paying attention for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And I'm like, oh, that's like, I'm glad I got to talk to you again. And then probably the most valuable part is the feedback loop, which most people don't talk about. They think of it as like notoriety and like, what can I get for that?
Yeah.
I think of it as the ideas that I put out there in any form. When I'm off, I know immediately. Like the internet is unrelenting. When I've hit on something that resonates, I know immediately as well. And so if you just think about this as like, let's say you have an idea and you've got to go talk to 50 of your friends and that takes you a year. And then I know that in a minute. Like guess who's going to progress faster, right? It's that feedback loop. I just get it every single second, every time that I put something out. And so that's a huge advantage. The downsides are everyone thinks when you're successful with a specific investment or a business that it's going way better than it really is. Always. Like, doesn't matter. I mean, Bitcoin's been up a lot. You can go look to see what it is. People always think that it went up even more because they have bad memory, right? They're like I literally had somebody come up to the street one time. He's like, what was it like to buy Bitcoin at $1? I was like, dude, I was like, I wish, right? But like they just are like, oh, you've been around for a while, and they just immediately assume the extreme, right? So like, there's some of that stuff that goes on. The second thing is your mistakes are magnified. Like you're always under more scrutiny. And so like you can look at that, again, optimistic or pessimistic way. I use it as like hey, I got to really be on my stuff all the time because you don't want to make the mistakes. And if you do, you want to have a good reason for it. But I could see that being a huge downside. The third one that I think Tim talked about in the piece is the security stuff. There's been a number of incidents where some of them have been pretty innocent. I've told a story before. Somebody walked up to my wife and I when we had our daughter, and the first words out of their mouth were, "Is that?" and used her name. Like in the middle of a coffee shop, right? And like immediately your reaction, even though I'm like a pretty chill guy, was like, I'm going to put this dude's head through the window, right? Like who? And then you realize like, no, he's just couldn't have been the nicer guy. Was like incredibly kind and like conversational and like all these things. Yeah. And he was just trying to break the ice. But then you start to realize like if you put information out there, it's like you're having a one-way conversation with people. They know all this stuff, right? And so you want to do it as much as possible, but still retain kind of the privacy, security, stuff like that. And there's been, some more serious stuff that it just kind of makes you think like, okay, what's worth it? What's not worth it type stuff. An easy one on the security side is I used to travel a lot. And when I would go internationally, I would bring Plina. And we were in a country, we did a meetup. And it was in a country where like we knew a couple people, but not that many people. I knew a lot of people were going to show up. And I didn't really know, like, is there a security concern or not? And so I was in the military, like, I'll be okay. I'll figure it out. But as we were driving there, it dawned on me, like, if something happens, she has no clue what to do. And so then I had to have a conversation with her and I was like, go to the extreme, right? If this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. Do you have a number saved for this? Do you know the address? Like all these things that are just like natural to me. And I could see that she was like, wait, do I really need to be worried? Like, and now all of a sudden you're like, hey, is this worth it? Right? Like I want her to be there, but also there's that aspect of it. So I just think that people see the positives, they don't see the negatives, but for the people who have the audience, the negatives can outweigh the positives in terms of like what you remember. But then again, look, I'd be lying if you said to me, sum up like that entire experience. I've gone all around the world. I've probably at this point met hundreds of thousands of people that I would have never met without it. Like, dude, who am I? Like, I can't complain about a single thing. Yeah. So you kind of just deal with the downsides, right? And try to mitigate risk and do all that kind of stuff. But like, I wouldn't trade this shit for the world, right? And so you're just like, okay, it's a net positive. Be aware of downside stuff. And then also, I think you just got to always remember why you have the notoriety, the audience, et cetera. It's not because you're actually smart or doing anything. It's because of all of those people. And so if you can keep that mentality, we're doing a Christmas party. And I don't know, it's the third year we've done it. And like, we probably, if I really worked hard and stuff, like could make a bunch of money. Like we make no money on it, but why do I do it? Because it's fun, right? And two, it kind of feels like we're like giving back a little bit of just like, hey guys, we want to all just get together with a bunch of people that we know, some people we don't know, and like have a good time. And what it does is it kind of reminds you of we're all in this together. I learn from you, you learn from me. And as long as we can keep that in mind, it's just a better, environment, I guess.
I want to take a sec to touch on crypto.
We got a long time. I think I only said Bitcoin one time.
Yeah, I know, man. Obviously, like it's been a hell of a last couple of years, but to revisit the broader thesis here, right? We spoke about shared narratives and faith in institutions earlier, and it feels like a lot of this kind of stems from that. So if I were to ask you what you thought about Bitcoin today versus 3 years ago, what would be different?
I believe more, right? Like Bitcoin, when I first came across it, I was very skeptical. I even think I tweeted it, but I don't know. I started in quote unquote crypto by mining ETH. I didn't have a position in like mentally in terms of, ETH is better than Bitcoin, Bitcoin this way. I didn't even care about crypto. I don't even think I understood that. It was just like buy computers, it prints money, right? Like in mining. And I was like, this sounds awesome.
This is great.
Yeah, like cool, right? Again, it goes back to like very low entry point, almost like if somebody had explained this big thesis and I had to put money in and buy an asset, and I'd probably be like, it's too confusing for me. Yeah. But like a young kid was like, if you buy these computers, you plug them in, it just gives you like cash flow. Like, that's just simple where I buy the computers, right? And over time, as I learned more about it and everything, I started to kind of form thesis and opinions and all this stuff. And with Bitcoin, it was more about, in the beginning for me, just this is interesting. And if I think it's interesting, probably other people will think it's interesting. And if it's a finite asset and more people want it, the price probably goes up. Yeah. Like that was like pretty much it. Now, fast forward 7-8 years, I don't know if there's another option, right? So if you look at it and just evaluate it as like a macro asset, it's available globally, it's digital in nature, no one can create more of it, like all these things that people know now. And if the national debt gets worse and spending doesn't stop, it goes up in price. Well, you pretty much described every country in the world. And so it's just like, I know it really upsets the traditional finance folks, but like Bitcoin today is at like, I don't know, $38,000. It was $8,000 in February of 2020, right? So like, I'm not good at math, but I'm pretty sure that they beat every single hedge fund if you just bought Bitcoin and held it.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about, almost 500% return since 2020. Now, when you think through that, you're like, okay, but maybe it can't continue. And maybe it can't, right? Past performance is not indicative of future performance. But why did it go up? Well, it went up because whenever there's uncertainty, there's chaos, there's undisciplined monetary policy, like all these things. People just want some degree of certainty, right? They want something that is outside the system, something that they can depend on. What better thing to depend on than software that can't be changed? And so people buy some of it. Now, more people internationally continue to buy. More people continue to mine it. And now you got Larry Fink going on television, BlackRock CEO, and saying it's a flight to quality. Like this thing is going to continue to be a highly sought after asset. And so I always come back to this idea of, I've studied a lot of the great investors over time. There is a very high degree of them that only got one or two things right in their career, but they got them really right. And so this feels like for an entire generation, this is going to be one of a couple of things that if you got right, you did pretty good, right? And if you had $10 and you bought some, great. If you had $10,000, great, right? Like the amount of money, all this stuff, like it's more of just like, if you have a certain view of the world that seems to be more right than wrong currently, you probably are more sympathetic to buying Bitcoin than otherwise. And so, it kind of just goes back to like, yeah, you probably want to be right. If it's one of the, 5 things you got to get right in your life, then it's good to be there.
As far as like adoption is concerned, you mentioned Larry Fink. We were talking about the BlackRock ETF sort of right before we started. Turns out they have a pretty stellar track record of approval. It's 575 to 1 in applications. In your mind, how does institutional adoption play out? And like, why are these massive financial institutions interested in Bitcoin to begin with?
Because they can't get a return anywhere else, right? So one of the lies, there's a lot of lies in the traditional financial system. There's many that are academic, efficient market hypothesis, wrong, right? All this stuff.
Yeah.
One of the lies, though, is that you buy bonds as a safe haven asset. TLT, the Treasury Index, is down double digits this year. Bitcoin is up 120%. There's a lot of chaos that's happened. Geopolitical conflict, like all this stuff, right? So I think what's happening is there's a shift from where does the trust lie? And it's not a shift that's a complete like a net zero or a zero sum type shift where I trust the US government and treasuries, now I don't. Because I actually think that there still is a ton of trust, rightfully so, in the US government, treasury markets, like all that kind of stuff. But I think that people are saying, I used to only trust that in times of chaos and uncertainty. Now I trust that and I trust this other thing. And so it's almost like they've like expanded the trust circle, if you will, to include Bitcoin. And I think that's why Larry Fink is on television saying it's a flight to quality. Like obviously in his mind, he thinks it is quality, or he wouldn't say it publicly, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like unfathomable. I mean, he literally at one point said it was an index for money laundering. And so sure, the cynic would say, oh, he just figured out a way to make money off of it, so now he's going to do it, right? I know people at many of these Wall Street institutions who are working on this stuff and ETFs and stuff. That's not the sense I get. I mean, maybe they're tricking me, right? But the sense I get is that no, they've done a lot of work on this. They've really started to understand it. They've talked with the executive teams. They've gone through various scenarios, and they're like, oh, this is a paradigm shift. There is going to be a bunch of trust, which means capital that's going to flow into these assets. Our business is to give people access to assets. We should have a way to give people access to this asset. The crazy part is they may do it at the perfect time. We may get ETF, interest rate cuts, money printing, and halving all within 5 months of each other. If that happens, hello 2020, 2021 again.
When it comes to like grasping technology, we've, talked about stupid politicians for like half the podcast, but do you think
Sorry, politicians,
do you think
they give me shit too, by the way? It's a two-way street. They think that we're stupid.
It's fair. Do you think like the slow sort of moving like bureaucratic machine, just how long it takes any of this stuff to sort of play out, do you think that's more of a bug or a feature on that?
I think it's both. Right. You use pork as a great example, like in the bills.
Pork?
Pork is like, let's say we've got a bill for, street safety. Yeah. And then all of a sudden there's like, as I described earlier, there is, let's study some random, fungus in the woods. And you're like, what does that have to do with streets, right? And I used to think like we should remove all of the pork and we should just, focus. And I have a friend who's very well known and respected who he's like, no, we need that. That's the grease in the transactions. The person on the other side of the aisle would never agree to sign this unless you gave him something. And so that's what makes it work. It's an interesting way to think about it, right? And so part of the bureaucratic process is some of that stuff where we think about it as it's stupid, right? But it's kind of like the guy who walks up to a club and knows, hey, if I slip the bouncer $100, probably going to get in, right? There's a lot of people who are like, well, I didn't see a sign that said that, you're supposed to give him $100. It's like, well, that guy knew that, right? Yeah. And like, it works. And so I think that is kind of some of the bureaucratic stuff is like, I've never been a politician, right? If I'm going to say to the politicians, hey, you shouldn't be regulating technology you've never used before, like actually maybe one of the things is we shouldn't tell the politicians their exact processes if we've never been a politician, right? And so what I've done, or at least tried to do well, is go talk to a bunch of people who have been politicians and say, hey, how does it work? Like what happens when the doors close? What is the conversation like? How's the decision making when you're trying to get votes for certain things? Like what is that like?
Yeah.
The ones who are not politicians anymore but used to be, they're a lot more forthcoming than the people who are currently politicians, right? For obvious reasons. But I do think there's downsides to it as well. So some of it's like, hey, it actually helps things get done by playing these games, and it's a way to get people who might not otherwise be on board with something to get on board. The downside is obviously it's bureaucratic, right? It's slow, it's painful, it's all this kind of stuff. The crazy part is that most of the administrations are more similar than different. The national debt goes up regardless of a Republican or Democrats in office.
Yep.
So like how much of it is the politicians versus systematic, right? The other thing is that the politicians actually don't have nearly as much impact as maybe we think. And what I mean by that is like, take the last 4 presidents, right? 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. When each one of them was elected, there was one part of the country that was screaming, we're all going to die, right? Like, and some of it was just posturing stuff, but some of it, like, I mean, I know people who have critiqued Biden and Trump. They genuinely believe what they're saying, right? When you look at it, they get things done, but it's not super catastrophic, like huge shifts to the point that it's going to last forever. Because guess what? Checks and balances, a new president comes in, and if something was really crazy, they roll it back. And so I think we just got to remember to ourselves that the private sector probably has more of an impact on our lives and things that we do than the politicians do. And that means it's even more important that we get it right. And for the like bug versus feature, maybe actually the best place is for it to be a bug and a feature, right? And it's kind of like straddling that line means we got to put up with a little bit of bullshit to also get a little bit of things done.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you kind of fall back on like compete, don't complain, same way that I always tell communists or socialists, like, well, if you think it works, then like go do it, right? But like so far, the capitalist democratic society seems to be the best, you know, system that we've created. If we think there's a better governance system, like show me, right? People are trying. I mean, if you look crypto, just tried all these governance things, like whatever. It's unclear that anyone's got a better system than, you know, what we have now, even though the system right now is full of flaws.
On the topic of regulation and competing, not complaining, this is like a good segue. We've seen a lot of big companies like a Citadel or a Tesla move to places like Florida or Texas that tend to be a little bit more business friendly. In the context of company building, anything we've been talking about, like what's your take on the future of regulatory arbitrage, right? This idea that places need to compete for residents or companies or inhabitants. Does it just get more intense from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just been the trend. It's hard to see it, you know, not continuing at least, if not accelerating. You know, look, as somebody who lived in New York, moved to Florida, right? Lived there, loved Florida, loved Miami.
Came back.
Yeah, and you know, look, I have a number of friends who moved there and left, and they're like anti-Miami. That's not me, right? It's actually the exact opposite. I am probably one of the most long Miami New Yorkers in the city, right? Because I lived there, I understand, you know, kind of all the structural benefits, the tailwinds, all that kind of stuff. So I think that the business friendliness is some part of it. The weather, that like all these things will help that area continue to thrive and succeed. When I was deciding whether we were going to move back or not, taxes is a huge thing, right? And kind of what I said to myself was, what do I get for the taxes? And a lot of people, right? Like I've railed on California. I lived in California before. What do you get for a lot of money, right? And like some people would say the things that they treasure, right? And they're willing to pay the taxes. Yeah. For us, I think that's what it ultimately came down to, was like, I don't think anyone on the planet is like, I want to pay more taxes. Actually believes that, right? You see like billionaires sometimes go on TV and say, like, cool, well, why don't you just send them more money then? Like, why do you need them to take it from you? Just put your check, put an extra couple $1,000,000 on it and send it to them and shut up, right? Nobody does that. And so it's like, okay, if we're going to pay this stuff, like I love walking through Central Park. It's worth it to me, right? My wife is happy here. It's worth it to us, right? Like you're just kind of paying something. So I do think that while the competition will get more intense, it's not just a tax thing. taxes is a huge piece of it. Weather obviously is unlikely to change, but I think there's other things that play into the decision, obviously. And so, yes, competition will happen. If it's just a tax conversation, Florida and Texas already won and probably extend their lead because the other states are going to have to continue to tax more, whereas Florida and Texas seem to have figured out ways to not have to do that. But I also just kind of always revert back like, I don't give a fuck where anyone else lives, right? Live wherever you want.
Yeah.
If you're happy, great. There are people I know who there's one city in the world that they're happy and they're unhappy anywhere else. You should go live in whatever city you want to live in, right? I know other people who are like, dude, I don't care where you put me. I'm happy in, Cabo. I'm happy in Bulgaria. I'm happy in New York City. And I'm also happy in Colorado, right? And it's like, okay, then just pick one, right, and go live there. So it's always interesting to me, this fascination of like, where do you live? Why do you live there? You sure? Right? Like, who the fuck cares, right? It'd be kind of like, I don't know, books. If I say, hey, like, what book are you reading? Then all of a sudden I critiqued you as to like, why are you reading that book? Like, no, you're reading the books you fucking want to read the book, right? Like, who am I to tell you what you want to do? And so, I don't know. It's just this weird thing. It's kind of like the culture war stuff, right? I always tell founders, I'm like, look, I get it. The culture war, like, it's enticing. It's the shiny thing on the table. Like, your company is not going to be successful or not successful based on your stance on the culture wars. If you intellectually are interested in doing it and it makes you happy, knock yourself out. Go become the greatest culture warrior of all time, right? But if you're not interested in it, don't worry about it. Just do the things you're interested in. So I think that people, if they just had maybe the courage to like just do what they want to do, it's fine. Society would be better off.
There's this interesting tidbit I read. You hosted this conference recently, the Build Summit, and you'd noted that a lot of people had come and flown into New York City from Finland. I'm curious, any places you're particularly excited by?
In 2016 or 2017, I think it was something like that. I went to Lagos, Nigeria. And I came back and I wrote a piece and I said, I saw the future of the consumer internet. And Nigeria has, and this is from memory, so if I don't screw these numbers up, I think it's over 200 million people population-wise, growing at a pace that will make it so there are more Nigerians than Americans by 2050, right? Pretty high internet penetration, very young demographic, which equates to high technology kind of sophistication. That place will be on fire in terms of innovation and economic production for decades to come. They have demographics right. They've got technology adoption. Here we go. I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from Singapore, more from like the government side, right? I don't think that's kind of a unique idea. And then I'm very bullish on what I'm just going to call like young people on the internet. And what I mean by that is like when I was growing up, especially in high school, like we had AOL Instant Messenger. And that was pretty cool. We got to talk to each other, whatever. If I wanted to learn, I was like, I don't know, maybe too dumb to like go search on the internet. There wasn't a lot of information there, whatever. I did a podcast interview. A kid emailed me or DM'd me and he said, I want to interview you. I'm 14. So those who know me, I'm like, all right, I'm in. Right? Like I'd love to help you, right? And we were doing the interview and I forget how it came up. I think maybe I saw his microphone or something happened. He had to like fix it real quick or something. So I started talking about it. And he told me he made his microphone. Made it. I was like, what do you mean you made your microphone? Like, bro, I got this thing I got at the store, right? Like, what do you mean you made it? And so when we got done, I said, take a picture of it and send it to me. He literally made the microphone. He'd got a bunch of spare parts and all this stuff, whatever, and like put it together and like, that's how he got a microphone. And so I was messaging with him and I was like, how did you make it? And he's like, well, I like looked up how to make a microphone. I then like found, okay, these parts, whatever. I went and then I found the parts, came back and I looked up how to assemble them and like whatever. And I was just like, first of all, how many 14-year-olds are doing that? Not many, right? How many 14-year-olds have a podcast? Not many. But I was like, man, this guy in India is no different than anyone else in the world who is 14 years old and ambitious now has this like unlimited amount of information. Watch out, right? And so making a microphone, it's kind of a stupid example.
Sure.
But it also wasn't just a software thing, right? It was like actually making something. And so I think that the kind of young people growing up on the internet today, they see the examples of what's possible. They have the resources available to them. And if they can just add in kind of time and ambition, I think we'll look back and we'll be like, man, how many of those young people ended up actually, creating things that solve problems or change the world?
To shift gears for a second, home stretch here. You've spoken about your experience here a good amount, but it felt wrong not to at least touch on it. You served as a sergeant in the U.S. Army, were deployed to Iraq for a period of time. I'm curious, in the wake of a lot of sort of conflict we've seen in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, regardless of where it is, I mean, what are the biggest lessons you've taken from war, and what did it teach you that the rest of us probably don't understand?
No one who has gone to war will go on Twitter and advocate for war. The most of the people who have had that experience understand that it is necessary at times. They understand that it can be an incredibly effective tool, but it should be the last tool. And in both conflicts, I see people on both sides advocating for a thing that I don't think they really understand. They've never seen. They don't understand the devastation and pain that it causes. And so politicians usually get like a lot of shit, and people are like, oh, if you want to go to war, like send your kids, right? I grew up, and many of the people I see doing this are my age, around my age. I was in 8th grade when September 11th happened, right? Many of the people who are advocating for other countries, young men and women, to go to war and potentially die are the same people when their country was at war were unwilling to go themselves. That doesn't mean everyone should go to the military. Doesn't mean that they should be heckled or punished for it or anything, right? But it does bring up a question where the people who were of age, didn't do it, and don't say anything, it's not their thing, right? They're just like, hey, look, I did live my life. Like, we can't expect everyone to have an opinion on everything. But if you feel so passionately about the use of that tool, it questions, well, when your country needed you, why didn't you pick up the tool, right? And so it's a very nuanced, delicate conversation. There's a lot of emotion involved. But there's a great speech that Marcus Luttrell gave. Marcus, for those that don't know, Lone Survivor is a movie, it's a book. He's one of 4 Navy SEALs in Afghanistan. A horrendous situation. 3 of his friends get killed. He survives, Lone Survivor. And in this speech, he basically says, to the politicians, your job is to be diplomats. And you should do everything in your power to prevent us from going to war. Because when we go to war, you are going to send me. And when I go, I will bring the hell and fury that I've been trained to bring with me. And I will leave death and destruction in my path. But we should use that as a last resort. And so I just think that it's easy for both sides to be bloodthirsty on Twitter. And I wonder how many people would change their attitude or their kind of position if they had to follow through with the thing they're suggesting, right? Now, with that said, I am blown away by the number of Israelis specifically is where I've seen this the most, who, when October 7th happened, flew back to Israel. It's like the ultimate skin in the game, right? And so I just think that there's two very different, like that's two different responses, right? Some people get on Twitter and start chirping. Some people flew and said, give me a gun.
Yeah.
And so I just think that like, we have to be very careful. We don't become a world where words are like separated from the actions that they actually mean. And then on top of that, we have to be able to sift through the nuance of war, which the United States, people forget, for 10 to 15 years, the United States actually had a very hard time in Iraq and Afghanistan because we wanted to engage in a war that we felt was necessary, but we had the morality to also believe that the preservation of innocent life was important, which led to this idea of rules of engagement. And so, I've publicly written about one situation in Iraq where an IED went off, and at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, pitch black outside, there were 2 guys running through an open field with AK-47s right after a bomb went off. Don't think they were going to get coffee. Right? Like, again, maybe, unlikely. We had to call for permission to engage them. And so, again, just why? God forbid it was the wrong person or something, like all these nuances. And so, if the United States is going to take that level of kind of carefulness and have the expectation of precision and accuracy in decision making and also in kind of delivery of the tool of its own soldiers, then we probably should request that from all sides elsewhere. Unfortunately, it's kind of like gun control. The criminals don't listen, right? You can create all the laws you want. The point is that they're a criminal. They're going to break the law. That I think really gets at the crux of the issue of we have the United States and its allies for the most part who are willing to adhere to certain rules and Geneva Convention, all stuff. And then there's a lot of people who also have weapons who maybe are part of a state, maybe they're not. They don't give 2 shits. And so how do you navigate that, I think, is important, right? And I speak from this from the United States. I saw it. It's hard and it's complex and it's frustrating. I think that's actually probably the most important thing people don't realize is it's frustrating for the people on the ground, right? It's kind of like in the most dumb example of all time. You ever see the NFL players now talk about like, there's a big hit and they're like, man, this ain't football anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's literally people who served in the military who were there over the last 15 years in Iraq or Afghanistan that kind of were like, this isn't war anymore, right? They're shooting at me and I can't shoot back. But again, it goes back to like, what is the purpose? What is the standard of which we're going to hold ourselves to? It's very difficult.
I have one more question for you.
All right.
Same one I ask everybody at the end of every episode. Inside or outside the scope of anything we talked about today, what should more people be thinking about?
Every single person listening to this is probably capable of much more than they realize. And the single biggest inhibitor to accomplishing whatever it is that is possible is that they will convince themselves, not me, not now, and no reason. But in order for us to increase GDP, solve these problems, etc., we need everyone to change that to why not me? Why not now? And here's the reason. And I think that when you are exposed to that idea, it gives you the license to think that way because everyone else up until some point has probably taught you the opposite.
Pomp, that's all I got for you, man. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate you.